by the year 2050, a quarter of humanity are going to be Africans and 5% Europeans. Well, how are we going to deal with this? Eritrea became the 14th Ethiopian province, and all the trouble about nationalities started. Basically, there is no such word. You cannot talk about nationalities. There's only one nation, after all. I mean, Ethiopia was one of the greatest supporters of decolonization. Don't forget, we were the only country that were founders of the United Nations. And they hated us because in every time United Nations came together in the 50s, we put up the question of the liberation of Africa. Once you get rid of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church and you get rid of the crown, Ethiopia is going to dissolve.
Do you imagine to have a role in the future of Ethiopia?
Oh, good Lord, why didn't you ask me this 20 years ago?
Hello everyone, welcome back. My guest today is no ordinary person. He's a member of the Ethiopian royalty, and more precisely, the great nephew of the last emperor of Ethiopia, Haile Selassie I. It is the Prince Asfa-Wossen Asserate. Your Imperial Highness, and herzlich willkommen.
Well, a very nice welcome I did receive from you. Thank you very much indeed.
You're welcome. You've lived in Germany for the most part of your life. I shall continue in English as my German is not sufficient to conduct this interview. And I want to jump directly in modern history with you because you were there for the communist revolution that occurred in Ethiopia in 1974. And to us French, it is quite something because the Communist Party was very strong in France at this time. We almost had a communist revolution, but we didn't. And so I wanted to ask you and to tell us about this revolution. What was it? How did it happen?
Basically, it was a return of the coup d'etat which occurred in Ethiopia in 1964. For 14 years, unfortunately, no real constitutional reforms were done by the imperial government. It was neglected. In other words, internal policies did not matter that much for His Imperial Majesty, but the foreign relations in which he was a master. So, whilst being brilliant, and Ethiopia's situation in the world being absolutely unique at that time, unfortunately, we did not learn from the mistakes that were done immediately after 1960. Two vital mistakes. First of all, no new constitution. Secondly, 2 years after the revolution, we unanimously decided to get rid of the Eritrean Federation. One of the biggest mistakes of the Ethiopian imperial government. This should never have happened. Far to the contrary, the system which we had and the relationship which we had with Eritrea at that time, done for us by the United Nations, by the way, we should have implemented that kind of a relation to the other 12 provinces in Ethiopia. And I can assure you, if we had done that, there would be no revolution. Instead of that, the federal system was erased and Eritrea became the 14th Ethiopian province, and all the trouble about nationalities started. Basically, there is no such word. You cannot talk about nationalities. There's only one nation, after all.
Yeah, well, it's Ethiopia. We'll get back to it. And are the other communists still in charge? No, I guess not. But how did they continue to reign? How did it?
Well, I mean, it was
collapse?
disastrous. In 1974, they first of all, they massacred 60 people without any kind of justice. randomly, amongst whom was my 52-year-old father. And later on, they killed the emperor himself, saying that he died after an operation, which was not the case.
Oh, they did not kill him like the imperial family
No.
in Russia?
No.
Okay.
They're in a far worse state, I would say. We don't really know what really happened that night, but it is supposed that they suffocated him with his own pillow, probably using some drugs as well. We have a very good information from his servant who was allowed to be with him. And that night, when he was there to serve his dinner, after that, they told him he doesn't need to sleep in that place. He should go home. And he said, no, I won't leave him. They said, no, you have to. And so he went home, and the next morning he came and he found the emperor dead.
And do you have a specific recollection of the, I would say, the infiltration of the communists? Because in France, you know, it's universities and intellectuals were promoting communist ideas. So I just wonder, in Ethiopia, how did they...
The same thing.
Same thing, okay.
It's the same thing. Don't forget the 1968 in France.
Yes.
And you know what is... I'm not worried about intellectual differences that occurred. What is so amazing about Ethiopia is that a whole generation found that the only solution was communism. If you know, I don't mind them being against the imperial government. As I said, I myself had a few things to challenge, and but my generation believed in the in the rule of the proletariat, is the dictatorship of the proletariat. Not even 1% said, why don't we look at Western Europe? Would not a republic, a democratic republic, be the answer to imperial rule? Not even 1%. Every intellectual was a Marxist-Leninist. And this in a country where only 8% of the people belonged to the proletariat. At that time, 85% of Ethiopians were farmers.
Interesting.
You see, there was not, we didn't have that many industries, you see, but still our intellectuals believed in the dictatorship of the proletariat, not knowing that that would be their end. Because not only did he kill the Ethiopian imperial family and imperial ministers and the emperor himself, what came afterwards, the so-called Red Terror and the so-called White Terror, over 600,000 Ethiopian youngsters had to leave their life, were killed.
So it's sad that intellectuals did not look to the West in response.
I understand that, because if you know, even their teachers were Americans. This is not so that they learned it from their teachers. They were all Americans, but don't forget, this was the time of Vietnam. Yes. You know, and the Americans who were sent as Peace Corps to Ethiopia, they themselves were socialists. They themselves were against the West. They themselves were against America. So that is the kind of thing they provided them. Interestingly enough, we had enough Ethiopian students who studied in Moscow. I assure you, not even 10% of them believed in the dictatorship of the proletariat after coming back from the Soviet Union. And that is quite something which we should really try and find out, that the greatest communists in the 60s and 70s were not educated at the Lumumba University in Moscow, but at the School of Economic Studies in London, in the Freie Universität in Berlin, and perhaps Berkeley in America.
Interesting.
It is very interesting.
So speaking of travel, I want to hear from you regarding a nice story that mixes your family life and the great history. it's still in 1974. Our president was Georges Pompidou, and he passed away this year. And your father came to the funerals, the official funerals of our president. And during these days, the communist revolution erupted, and you warned your father not to come back through the embassies. Tell us about how that happened.
First of all, we must know there was a very strong and close relationship between Imperial Ethiopia and France. It is due to the fact that the emperor himself was Francophone. You know, he was educated by French priests, and he loved France. And it's very interesting. There are only very few interviews of him speaking French. But in these interviews, you always find out that it started with Napoleon a dit, which is incredible. And then in 1974, President Pompidou died. We should know that 1 year before, he had come on an official visit to Ethiopia. So he was in Addis Ababa. I should also mention the close relationship between Emperor Haile Selassie and de Gaulle. That was really a very, very close relationship. And at the funeral of the great general, there you see him, the first row in the Notre Dame. But when Pompidou died, he wanted to go, but the revolution had slowly started, and he asked my father to represent.
Okay.
So he, as president of the Crown Council, he represented the Ethiopian emperor at the funeral in Paris. I was in Addis Ababa at that time. We're talking about, I think, February, March 1974. And things had already started to come up in Ethiopia. A new prime minister had been named, and the military was giving, trouble here and there. So I knew that something very, very harsh was going to happen. And I sent it. In those days, you had telexes.
Not telegram?
No, not telegram, but telexes from through the German embassy to the German embassy in Paris for my father, and told him things are going from bad to worse. You better stay there. He stayed a week because the emperor's firstborn son, Crown Prince Asfa-Wossen, was in Geneva in those days, receiving treatment. He went to see him, immediately came with the next plane. Even the revolutionists later told me, why did your father come? We were so delighted. We said he's not going to come back and he's going to stay. Why did he come back? And that is what I asked him. And he said, after all these years, after all what he has done for me, how can I live the emperor in his old age alone?
So he came back to support.
He came into, absolutely.
But still he met
his death.
Sad.
Absolutely.
Your Highness, you are Amara.
Not only.
Not only? Maybe tell us more, but
yes,
it's about
First of all, to be honest with you, nobody told me I was an Amara. My childhood, I was told, don't forget, you are also a Silti. That is what I learned. My father and mother never told me, you are an Amara. No. They knew that there was Amara blood in us. I knew everything about my forefathers, but they came from Begender, they came, which is Gondar, they came from Lastar and Choa, the royal lines of all the three countries, and my mother from the province of Wollo. She was the granddaughter of the empress. So, of course, I knew Wollo, I knew Gondar, I knew Lastar. But Amara, nobody considered at that time being an Amara. As a matter of fact, you would like to know, when the Organization of African Unity was established in 1963, I was 12 years of age, and I was in the German school in Addis Ababa. And we had a game amongst Ethiopian students. You went up to one Ethiopian student and said, "Where do you come from?" And he said, "I am a full-blooded 100% Ethiopian." Bam! Wrong answer. What am I supposed to say? Said, "That was yesterday. You have to say, I am an African." Can you imagine? This Pan-African dream was already in us. I never knew from which Ethiopian province any of my Ethiopian friends came from. The first time I started to know is when Meles Zenawi came to power in 1991. The people I grew up with, I had absolutely no idea.
But you had no idea because you were in a way protected, or
oh no,
no, it was not a real
oh good Lord,
issue.
Nobody knew. It was no issue at all.
So how did we move from
the Ethiopian
no issue at all to a
the Ethiopian
situation?
Intellectuals? This word, nationality, is a word which was firstly used by the leaders of the Ethiopian Students Association, and of course they all wanted the independence of Eritrea, and they started to talk about the rights of the nationalities, just the same thing as the republics in the Soviet Union.
So this is something that came in response to the communism, or
no,
it's
before.
related to
I'm
even
talking
before?
about the 60s.
Okay.
I'm talking about the time between the coup d'etat and the revolution, between 60 and 74.
And do you think that it was inspired by the decolonialism movement?
In many ways, yes, but the wrong way.
Yes.
I mean, Ethiopia was one of the greatest supporters of decolonization. Don't forget, we were the only country that were founders of the United Nations. And they hated us because in every time United Nations came together in the 50s, Ethiopia being the only state, except South Africa, who was a member, founding member of United States, we put up the question of the liberation of Africa. And we were hated by the entire West for that, you see.
Yes,
we played a very important role in the decolonization of Africa. I'm proud to say that it was the Ethiopian emperor who gave Nelson Mandela an Ethiopian passport and brought him to Ethiopia, trained him in counterinsurgency warfare, and sent him back again.
So this racial issue is not tied with communists or colonialism?
Well, you see, this is very interesting. I'm very glad you asked this question. I give you my word of honor that the Soviet Union and the People's Republic of China had nothing whatsoever to do with the Ethiopia revolution. Why? Because both Brezhnev and afterwards first Khrushchev and then Brezhnev were very close friends of the emperor. Do you know what they called them, the Soviet Union?
No.
The anti-fascist on the throne.
Ah, perfect.
This is it. So forget it. Why should they? Far to the contrary. In 1959, when he visited the Soviet Union for the first time, they were the first country in the world to give us a credit of 100 million, with which we built the oil refinery in the port of Assa, and 100 scholarships. You see? So that was Soviet Union. And China, do you realize? The Ethiopian emperor visited Mao Zedong 6 months before Nixon. You see? And Ethiopia was the first African state to recognize the People's Republic of China. So why should they do? Why should they get rid of that revolution? No.
It's not that. So why?
Of course it was certain, I won't say, but I'm definitely sure certain countries of the West were absolutely eager that the revolution in Ethiopia came.
And so why today?
To make Ethiopia weak. They knew once you get rid of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church and you get rid of the crown, Ethiopia is going to dissolve.
So so that's why the Amhara people would be persecuted today.
Absolutely, undoubtedly. You see, then all this talk about Amhara domination came. But I'm writing a small book about all the 225 emperors of Ethiopia. And I assure you, not one of them, not one, including Emperor Haile Selassie, came from one ethnic group. Not one of them. You might believe that, but we see, let me give you as an example, Emperor Johannes of Tigray. Everybody believed he was a Tigray. Forget it, his mother came from Wollo. You see, it's impossible. It really is impossible to talk about race and ethnicity in Ethiopia.
Yeah, I heard the same thing regarding your current president or prime minister, the one in charge right now.
Yes,
he has mixed origins actually.
He's both. He himself is. I think he's a newborn Christian, and his father and mother. His mother comes from Amhara, and his father was a Muslim from the province of Kaffa, from Jimma, from the state of Jimma.
And so you just brought the term of Christianity being how do you see the war or the problems? Tell me what you think of Christians in Ethiopia today. Are they deliberately persecuted? Is this a side effect? Is it a real threat?
As I said in my talk today, it is not a side effect, and we must concentrate on the Ethiopian Orthodox Christians. The persecution is wholly evolving to the Ethiopian Orthodox Church and not to the Ethiopian Catholics and not to the Ethiopian Protestants.
Okay.
And you see, Ethiopia is the country of the three Abrahamic religions, Jewish, Christian, and Islam. Nobody knows this.
Even Islam, yes, I'm surprised.
I'm so sorry, but without Ethiopia, perhaps there might have not been Islam. We were the first country in the world to accept the first Islamic refugees in 625. There's a brilliant place in the Hadith, the second most important book in Islam, when the governor of Mecca was trying to get rid of Muhammad, the prophet. He gathers his flock and he tells them, go to the country of the Lion of Judah and tell him that his God and my God, the Almighty God, is the only God on earth, and he will accept you. So these very few people come to Ethiopia, to Axum. We had an emperor called Hashama. They call him Negashi, which means from Negus, that is how it's called. And he tries to find out a little bit more about this new religion. He said, what does your new religion say about my sovereign, my God, the Almighty, and his Son, Jesus Christ? And they say, in our world, we call him Isa, and he is regarded as the highest of the prophets. What does your new book say about my mother, the Holy Virgin Mary? And then they started reading him the surah from the Quran called the Maryam Surah, and he started to cry because there she is revered as the virgin mother of the greatest prophet. He's completely, they said, what these people? And his last question was, what does your new religion say about my protector, the Archangel Gabriel? They said to him, we call him Jibril, and he is the one who brought the Quran to the Prophet Muhammad. And then he gave up, and he made a line on the floor and said, only this line divides us. You are allowed to stay in my country.
Interesting.
So after Mecca, the first mosque that was built was in Ethiopia, before Medina. So in Islam, you talk of the first hijrah, which was to Ethiopia, and only the second hijrah is from Mecca to Medina. So we Ethiopians are the country where these three Abrahamic religions are there. And as you know, as far as Judaism is concerned, all the Ethiopian Jews who came 1,000 before Christ, to Ethiopia.
Yes.
And so we should be, and that is what kept us alive all this time, with the exception, of course, of the terrible war with Grand Muhammad, in the 16th century, who devastated Christian churches. But afterwards, we lived in peaceful coexistence with one another.
That's very interesting. And since you're bringing biblical times, and as our viewers know, Ethiopia is mentioned in the Bible. And so like Egypt, we imagine a very, it's an old country, like yes. Even one of our ministers said for France. It gives a strength to the country because it passed the centuries. And what you're mentioning regarding the three religions, and when I'm thinking about Egypt also, I'm just wondering, is that how Ethiopia came to this point of being divided today? Isn't it precisely because of this religious mixture? Or how do you, analyze and explain the situation nowadays, that because there is an open civil war? Yes.
It has nothing to do with religion as such.
Okay.
For the simple reason, even our Ethiopian Muslims originally, until 1991, were Sufis. I would say 99% of Ethiopians were Sufis, a sect which were far more outreaching to Christians and other religions than other Muslim faiths, So there was absolutely no trouble. I grew up with Muslim children, and when it was Christmas, they came to our place, and when it was Ramadan, we went to theirs, and there was no disharmony. And that was what Ethiopia looked like until even under the time of the communist regime. As I said earlier on, it is this vile, evil constitution that brought the division in Ethiopia.
That's the key.
That is the key problem which we have, to make you aware of your ethnicity and not of your Ethiopianness. That is a crime. A biggest crime was committed there. As I say, an apartheid constitution. That's exactly what they did in South Africa, only between blacks and whites. Here, blacks are doing it on blacks. So everything started from there. And you know what is very interesting? There are 55 African countries, and not one of them consists of only one ethnic group. Every African country is multi-ethnic, you see? So what are we trying to say? And why do Europeans, why do they believe in Ethiopia? Why do they believe in this terrible, horrible constitution that divides people?
Yes.
And of course, there is an element of divide and rule regarding Africa. Now we have lost the colonies. We must divide them, and we must see that they must not come together. There's, of course, this school. And there, of course, they say, oh, there is no such thing as an African nation. There are only different tribes, and every tribe has got the right to become a nation. So, is that good for you? Do you know how many ethnic groups we have in Africa? 3,000.
Oh yeah, how was that?
You see, 3,000. You cannot even get going with 55 countries. How are you going to manage if there are 3,000 independent African states? You see, nobody sees that. And all these people crying out for the rights of minorities, believe you me, that's not the way. This also has nothing to do with democracy. Unity in diversity, and diversity in unity. This is democratic.
You remind me of the quote of Charles de Gaulle regarding France, and he
Yes.
said, "How do you want to rule a state that has over 500 cheese?"
This is absolutely right, and that is the
So
case in
this is-
Ethiopia.
And so now that you identified the reason or the constitution, the key issue, I'm thinking also about another country that has a long history, Iran. Iran had just signed a peace treaty with temporary peace with the US, and we've heard of the Shah and of the role he would be willing to play for his country and to bring back peace, to bring back some liberties. What would be your solution? Do you imagine to have a role in the future of Ethiopia?
Oh, good Lord, why didn't you ask me this 20 years ago?
You're still in good shape.
Well, if you had done that, I'd say, certainly I would. I will be very honest with you, even then, even in my lesser ages, I believed in one thing. I believed that the Ethiopian people had never been given the chance of telling, being asked what they believe in. An opportunity to say, do I want an emperor as head of state? In other words, a constitutional monarchy? Do I want a Western kind of president?
Republic.
A republic, in the republic side, or an executive kind of president like in America. This has never been done. So I believe that the real sovereigns of Ethiopia are the Ethiopian people. And it is their right to know what they want, and they should be asked. There should be a referendum on this. I also say this question, whether the next head of state is going to be an emperor or a president, is not what is vital at the moment. Today, the question is being or not being. The question of the surviving of the entire Ethiopian state. Because the hate, and you see, this is the most unbelievable thing. I have not used until now the word dictator. Dictators are nationalists. Tell me a name of a dictator who doesn't say, I am the greatest Cuban that has ever lived. Nobody is better than me as a Cuban. I'm the greatest Venezuelan. I'm the greatest Italian. And as you know, Germany, I'm the greatest German, and perhaps not European, but the greatest man on earth. Ethiopia is the only country where those people who run it do not identify themselves with Ethiopia. I would go one further step and say, and hate the institution of Ethiopianism.
And very briefly, are you optimistic about the future? Do you think that such a because organizing a referendum is not a complicated thing?
Well, absolutely not.
It seems like an easy path.
First of all, we have to get rid of this government. And yes, I do believe we are organized. And thank God we have an army, a very strong, powerful army called the Fano in the Amhara state. We are looking for democratic partners in the other regions of Ethiopia, especially the southern regions. And we hope to have a common front so that one day we may be able to get rid of this most inhuman institution called ethnic federation.
That's the key. About ethnicity still, you published a book in 2018 about, the title is interesting. It's African Exodus, Migration and the Future of Europe. And you've been living in Europe for maybe most part of your
my life, over 55 years.
You've been in Germany.
Yes.
And how do you perceive this African exodus?
You see, my friend, by the year 2050, a quarter of humanity are going to be Africans and 5% Europeans. Well, how are we going to deal with this? We're going to live in a world where Nigeria alone will have more population than the entire continent of Europe. Nigeria alone.
Yes.
Are we ready for it? So what are the root causes of immigration today? The root causes is that we have not been able to get rid of the African dictators. That Africans, with the exception perhaps of Botswana, have not been able to really enjoy a democratic state and all the goodness that comes out of a democratic state. And until Europeans believe in what they themselves ask internally, you know that Europeans tell us we have European virtues.
Mm-hmm.
But these virtues are only internal. They have nothing to do with your foreign policy. Because in your foreign policy, you have something which you inherited from the German language, which has now become internationalized, the realpolitik.
Right.
And what does realpolitik really mean? It means, as far as Africa is concerned, it means you can be the greatest traitor, the greatest dictator on God's earth. As long as you are in power, we European Democrats will come crawling on our knees and worship you. God help you if you are no longer in power. That's it. Where are the European virtues?
I don't know, but since you're speaking of gods, I want to emphasize the word exodus you're using.
Yes.
Because it means a movement of biblical proportions.
Yes, absolutely.
Absolutely. It's interesting because in France and in Europe, we have this theory or so-called theory of the great replacement. That is this fear of Europeans of being replaced. And you're speaking of an exodus, so a mass migration, which would support this replacement.
In some ways it does, because why does a man leave his country, the place he was born in, his family, his relatives? Two things. Either he's hungry, and migration has been a part of humanity since there are human beings. They always migrated somewhere else when they didn't find anything to eat in their own place, when there was hunger, when there was war. Well, I don't need to tell you what happened during the Second World War and how many emigres there were in America and other African countries and European countries. You see, that is one cause. And the other one is when they have nothing to do. If they cannot be in a position to work and give their children a future through the work they do. And I see that is happening everywhere in Africa.
Yes.
Nobody wants to come to Europe, as they believe, to be honest with you.
Yes.
They would like to come and see Paris. There's no doubt about it. But most of the emigres which you find now crossing the Mediterranean come for very, very different reasons and have to undergo the most terrible, terrible processes which you cannot even dream about.
But deep down, according to you, why do they come?
Because of the fact that there is no good governance in the country they live.
And so, should European states intervene or help getting rid of bad governance?
This is what I've been, for 30 years, I've been saying this.
You want
I've been saying development aid is no use.
Okay.
For the simple reason, because it goes into different channels, it lands back with you, so it has some, even what side you give it, and your banks are full of the development, your development aid that has come through African countries. And just to give you an example, the daughter of the president of Angola is the second richest woman in the world. You see? So is that what you want? And if you go on like this, you will have mass migration.
Yes.
You know, but if you say, look, the money we're giving you, they come from the Frenchman who pays his taxes. And every Frenchman should know that his taxes are going through the right channels. And the government should say, I'm sorry, my people, the people who elected me to power, do not want that this money comes to you, because you're going to squander it on your own, and the people are not going to get anything out of it. So I think it is really the legitimate, the situation of the giver, and they should be able. But to say, because I need your coltan, or whatever it is, well, I'll shut an eye of what you do to your own people, whether you believe in human rights or not, is not the democratic way of dealing with Africans.
Yeah, because as you surely noticed, Europeans are in a bit of a peculiar situation because there is a demographic collapse.
Right.
They simply do not have children anymore. But you see also these events in the United Kingdom against mass migration, the reactions there are against this uncontrolled or this migration that is perceived as massive and uncontrollable and so on. You've been living in Germany, and you were in Germany when Angela Merkel
Absolutely.
welcomed
Absolutely.
1 million of Syrian refugees, if I remember correctly.
You're right.
How do you judge or see this policy, or are we right to welcome so many people? Is it viable? As an Ethiopian, how do you perceive that?
To be very honest with you, I would say if you could qualify migration and say, of course we need migration. Take Germany, for example. We know that in 3 years' time, we're not going to have enough people working for hospitals. Why don't they make up a program and say, yes, Germany is ready to take 30,000, just a number, of the Africans, youngsters between the age of 25 and 35, and give them education and work in a hospital, for 5 years. Every African country will sign that they will take them back after the end of the 5 years, and another lot will come.
Okay.
So what are you doing? These people are going to be very well educated. When they go back home, they can open their own businesses. They can be very, very
useful to their countries.
Absolutely. So that is development aid on the one hand side, and it is also you doing the right thing as far as migration is concerned, because you are bringing in people who you need.
Yes.
To take care of the old and so forth. There are many. And so Europe has the right to say that. So it'd say, I will only take 50,000, I'll take 30,000, and I will make for them for my use. Yes, it's true.
But most of the migrants right now do not all work, and so
that is the whole point.
We do not take only qualified people. We tend to accept people who come, and I think it's a miss, it's a loss for the countries they are living.
It's a loss for the countries, and it's a loss for Europeans as well. For example, there are migrants who have not been allowed to work in Germany for years and years. Why don't you make them use for any kind of work? So they don't need to stay in this house of asylum, and think about getting rid of the German state.
And my final question is about the strength we should use against other governments in Africa. I'm just thinking about Algeria, since we're speaking of immigration, because there are some politicians who think that we should be lenient and nice and try to collaborate with Algeria, while others believe that we should be firm, strong, send back criminals and stop negotiating with the government, but have strong measures. Generally speaking, what do you think is the good approach on this? Since you're thinking of I'm getting rid of dictators.
To be very honest with you, I think l'Algérie, France is no longer there, and one should be able, whatever colonialism has done, it has also brought some kind of oneness, some kind of exchange of culture. The Frenchman who cannot eat any food without using the pepper that comes from Algeria, you see, harissa, or the Algerian who cannot live without foie gras. I mean, these are the things which which bind people together. So I think one should go on that, understand that there's no going to be any matter of colonialism anymore, and start afresh as partners. That is, as partners, with the right of saying, look, my country is not half as the size of your country. We have to give them work as well. But if there is enough work that needs to be done, of course, we're going to import also migrants. I think it is something to sit down on a table and talk about.
Thank you so much, Your Imperial Highness, for
it's a great pleasure
speaking with us. It was very, very good. Thank you for coming to Strasbourg.
It's a great pleasure. Hopefully we'll see each other again. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.